Oh my gosh,
What
we're
a
so
great
excited.
beginning.
I know, right? It's and I think we're filming this on a Monday.
That's right.
And we have this much energy on a Monday, which should tell you something about a great weekend that we had. Maybe.
Well, we would like to welcome Charles Spinosa, author of Leadership as Masterpiece Creation. He's also, he's got a background in philosophy. He's got a background as a management consultant. He's got a background in Shakespeare.
Oh, as a professor.
We're really interested in, we'll probably talk about, and just an all-around great guy. We'd like to thank Louis Hernandez, who I think, Charles, published his podcast today with you on it. Is that correct?
I think it's tomorrow, but you might know better than me.
Yeah. Well, welcome,
welcome.
You.
Charles, you want to do a quick introduction of yourself and tell our viewers and listeners all about how cool you are?
Okay, I'll try to do the cool version of myself then.
All right.
Who am I? I've been a management consultant for the last 27 years, but what I've done as a management consultant is bring to leaders what I taught in philosophy and what I taught in literature. And what was that? That was how to be able to change yourself, how to be able to create a better story of who you are and live that better story. When I taught Shakespeare, that's what Shakespeare's tragedies are all about. What do you die for in a Shakespeare tragedy? You die for the story of yourself. Read the last lines of Hamlet, read the last lines of Othello. I'm talking to former actors. They get this. Read the last lines of Macbeth. That's what it's about. It's living your story. I taught Nietzsche. I taught Heidegger. They're about living your story, but not getting stuck living your story and changing your story when you have to. And that's the core of the kind of consulting I've done. Now, I do that for individual leaders, but what I've come to see is that's what organizations have to do themselves. And I've come to see that organizations, the leaders of organizations want to make their organizations morally distinctive. And I have to say, like other consultants, I was out there for the first, to confess the truth, probably 20 years doing what they did, giving people operational frameworks for improving profitability, for improving revenue, for improving productivity. Now, I thought it was cool because the humanities, I said the way you improve profitability, the way you improve revenue, and this goes to the cool part about me that I'm trying to answer, is by creating good lives for your employee and creating good lives for your customers. You don't sell goods, you're selling good lives. That was the message I used to preach. That's why I think I'm cool. And that your listeners should be able to see how I'm constantly drawing on the background in the humanities to help businesses succeed. Now, I would take that basic thesis and say, well, what do you do? Well, you listen for the sense of difference between yourself and your customers, and you invent new offers on the basis of that. And I would have frameworks for that. And why would you do that? You do that so you could increase profits, increase revenue, and make lives better for your customers. My most famous case was with CEMEX. It's been written about in lots of cases, Blue Ocean Strategy. I wrote about it in an article for the California Management Review. But there, we found a way to sell cement to poorer Mexicans. And poorer Mexicans didn't believe in saving money. They didn't believe in trying to build credit. They believed strictly in neighborhood parties. So essentially, we got neighborhood groups to buy the cement. And CEMEX was able to double and triple its profits. And these people were able to build their houses two-thirds the cost and half the time. It was an amazing win-win. But guess what? This is what I didn't get at the time. The leaders didn't like that. The leaders of CEMEX didn't like that. The leaders of CEMEX were all about how Mexicans should be financially responsible, each and every one. That was a great thing. CEMEX wanted to make everybody in Mexico, this was the goal of the CEO at the time, totally financially responsible. And eventually this program, which had great profits, died out after a while. I didn't realize what was going on. I thought, well, really people aren't all that motivated by profits. Really people aren't motivated all that much by revenue. They just want to do what they want to do. But I didn't understand what that meant. And about 7, 8 years ago, I went into a consulting project with, I have to keep this all anonymous, with a gas distribution network. And this is the people that distribute natural gas all over. And this particular person had lots of distribution inside huge cities with multi-story buildings. And the worst thing that can happen if you are distributing natural gas is it catches fire. To make it even worse, if it catches fire in a multi-story building. And to make it even worse, if the shutoff valves are covered up with about 12 feet of cement. And even worse, and this is the situation my client was in, the maps of where the shutoff valves were and the pipes were 300 years old. And my client at that point had to do, he could follow procedures and allow more people to die, but be sure that he wouldn't be called before various tribunals. And he said to his senior team, what else can I do here? What can we do to innovate? I love innovation anyway. I know this is not an industry for innovation. What can I do? The way he tells the story, the senior team came up with a solution. I honestly believe he came up with a solution, but he's not admitting that. And basically the solution was to blow up a balloon inside the pipes to stop the gas. This is temporary. You could undo it pretty easily. You could do it in a whole bunch of them and you could undo it so you wouldn't have to turn off the gas to a huge region. His entire team said, don't do it. You're going to be before tribunals for the rest of your life, at least for the next 5 years. Management's not going to approve of it. He did it. And it was a stand for innovation. And it worked. He did it and it saved lives and it was about innovation. Now, was he called before tribunals? He was. For at least 5 years, he was regularly going before tribunals to justify this risky action inside a business that was anti-risk. Now, when I got there, he had done this all pretty much the day before I got there. When I got there, his question was, Charles, did I do the wrong thing? Was this just crazy? Should I give up on innovation? And this is with just the inside flash. I said, John, do it. You've already taken the risk. You're proving what it is to take this risk. Everybody inside your organization is going to get it. And he continued and he insisted that they innovate and innovate. And now he's got the largest network of gas sniffing cars. He's got the largest network of robots that go through the pipes to clean them out. And he stood for innovation and he did it by taking, and this is the core of the book, and this is what I think is cool about me and the book, taking a moral risk. If he had failed, he would have seemed like he was evil. People would have judged him that way. He succeeded, and ultimately the judgment is he did the right thing. He's a good person. And that kind of moral risk-taking is what leaders do to give themselves distinctive organizations. And a gas distribution network that is innovative is basically unheard of on the planet. He's the only one that has one.
Yeah, actually,
so
first of all, I would say, first of all, there's so much to unpack right there. Yeah. The first thing is we got to get our son in touch with you to chat Nietzsche, because our son loves philosophy. And so you guys would hit it off beautifully. And then the second thing that it made me think of is when he said to you, or it sounded like someone said to you that there's no innovation in oil and gas or in the gas industry. And that's so not true, because just like you, we've had that same experience where we worked exclusively in oil and gas when we first started. I can't think of an industry that was and has been and will continue to be more ripe for innovation practices moving forward, even amidst the highly regulated area that it's in. So that's first and foremost. I guess kind of where I'm going with that too is you've seen your kind of transition from academia, management consulting and academia kind of into really working mostly with leaders, it sounds like. And so when you think about the experiences that you have, what do you think from a power skill perspective, from from a soft skill perspective, what is missing in the way that we do business right now, whether that's in teams or in leadership? What are you seeing that's like that thing, that secret sauce that is needed among leaders or teams, just because the business is so incredibly vastly different today than it was even 5 years ago?
Okay, can I say two things? If I had to rank them, I would. But the first thing that's missing is courage. Everybody is seeking consensus. Everybody wants others, they want agreeableness. I didn't even know. I was shocked when I heard Adam Grant do a podcast. He's a famous professor at Wharton, about how people were calling agreeableness a virtue now. Agreeable is somebody who's going to go along with what people are saying. I never knew it was a virtue, but apparently I think he's right. It is considered a virtue. And as I walk around in corporate circles, well, I can't say this thing that I believe to be true because the CFO will stand against me. I don't have a majority of the senior team with me. I can't act on this. My view, and it comes out very strongly in the book, is the reason I have to say this is because nobody's going to back me. The reason I have to say this is because the CFO is going to be totally against it. The reason I have to say it is because no one else is saying it.
Yes.
That's courage. And that is the primary thing that's missing. It's also the thing when people say, when it comes to taking moral risk, I have to fire my founding employee because he's doing something that my company is not standing for.
Yep.
You have to do it. I mean, when I started consulting, I'd ask CEO after CEO, what is it that you've done wrong in your career? And everyone, man, woman, I didn't fire the people that were loyal to me but stood against what I did. And that's what I needed to do. And that's even more important now than it was 27 years ago when I started. So the first thing that is missing or weak is courage. Now, obviously, the industry shaping leaders, they have courage. But if you go down from them, actually, it's that middle that I worry about. If you go down to your local restaurant, your local stores, those leaders have courage too. And you can see it in how distinctive each of their enterprises is. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and it's linked to it, is what I call truth seeking and saying. And when you think about it, when people are under stress, what do all the management consultants tell them to do? Breathe. That's the first thing you do. Lower your heart rate. Get your parasympathetic system going. Well, that's all fine. But the first thing I argue that you do is you say, what do I believe to be true here? If somebody is challenging you, what do I believe really to be solidly true? Where am I on thin ice? Concede I'm on thin ice here, and I believe this to be true. And suddenly you shift the conversation because the other person, instead of attacking you, okay, I can see why you believe that to be true. It's nice that you're saying that's thin ice. Let's see if we can come to some sort of agreement. And it's not an agreement at that point based on agreeableness, the solution that most people will find agreeable or be able to go along with. It's a solution that both of you are saying, I believe this is true about our customers.
Yeah.
I believe this is true about our organization. I believe this is true about our suppliers. Yeah. And those truths, when you're in that kind of debate, don't have to be the typical conventional ones.
Right.
I believe our suppliers see us creating win-lose contracts with them. I think if we do X, they'll change. They'll try for a win-win contract with us. That's the kind of interesting truth that I'm looking for. So those are the two things, and they can both come under the heading of agreeableness has replaced courage and truth-seeking.
I love it. That's awesome.
It's interesting, and I really appreciate that answer when I think about it. So our background, as you know, Charles, is primarily in improv, right? So we've actually had our brain studied, taken a look at what happens in the brain when we're improvising versus not improvising. So there's really interesting data about the area of risk control that is engaged when you're not improvising versus when you are, meaning that improvisers by nature are more likely to take a risk. So this concept of having courage is all about risk. And the ability to practice in a space where you can learn that muscle or stretch and flex that muscle in the same way that you work out or you play the piano makes you more likely to be able to use that when you need to speak truth to power, right? Which is the other half of that answer that you gave.
Exactly.
And speaking truth to power is terrifying, right? It's one of those where if a CEO has it's a reason why there's a term called yes men, right? And everybody who's a leader maybe wants a yes man, and they still need some no men in there too, just so I should say no people, and yes people, and so that they can push against the assumptions that people are making. And then back to the improv piece, once a decision is made, everybody gets behind the decision and doesn't undermine the decision going forward, which in the work that we do is where we see a lot of challenge.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And in fact, when you were talking about that, it aligns so beautifully with a couple of our values, mm-hmm. which truly is, the courage piece is yes and, mm-hmm. For me, mm-hmm. it is this is happening and we have to do something, or this is happening and some tough decisions need to be made, or whatever it is. And we need so much more of that. And I also was thinking, we just had a conversation with a really good friend of ours, Zane Torrance, who is the CEO or president of Founders Advisors. So he works with organizations that are founders that are selling their companies to private equity or banks and things like that. And he said, when we were talking to him, he said, one of the things he's seeing in industry that's really challenging right now is a lot of leaders are standing on the sidelines and they're waiting for someone else to make a decision about what to do. The economy is incredibly tenuous right now, even though it's not really showing that. Everyone's feeling that. AI is super disruptive and everyone's worried about that. And so I could see this visual of all these leaders are just standing at the edge of the pool, the Olympic pool. And meanwhile, you've got these really amazing humans who are jumping in to break world records and get the medals. And those are the leaders that we love working with. And it sounds like you do too.
Yeah.
So I love working with, I just want to say, make a pitch for improv and what you do. I take it you do it spectacularly well. We do it when we're trying to get leadership groups to work together in a mood of joy. And that requires the yes and improv thing. That requires, just 2 weeks ago, we were working with a senior team, and there was a leader who is a really good entrepreneurial leader. He's out to change healthcare in a really positive way in the United States. And there's a lot of room for that. And his senior team, they're naysayers. Their first instinct when he comes up with a good idea is, no, that won't work for this reason. That won't work for this reason. That won't work for this reason. He's crazy today. And so we're working with them to get the yes and in there. And if you can do that, if you can get the whole team doing that, they reach resolution in an interesting way, and they come up with things that are more innovative. So that's I think what you're doing is great. And
thank you.
And we love it too. There's a neurobiological piece that goes to saying it's all the risk aversion. Nobody likes risk, so they say no to any idea. It's really remarkable. So pivoting back to your book, I'm curious to know what the biggest surprise was that you had when you were researching or writing the book. What was something that just came out of left field that you thought, whoa, I did not realize we were going to stumble on?
That's an interesting and good question. There are two things. I didn't think that this risk-taking that I'm so big on, and moral risk-taking when you're creating a company that's got a certain moral stance on things. I didn't think that there would be a strategic way to do that. I thought that was mostly situational. You run up against this problem, and you run up against this problem, then you run up against this problem. And then one of my co-authors ran into a leader, Julia Robertson, who actually changed the recruitment or the temp worker industry. She did it in the UK, and it's happening around the world now. And she did it by seeing what moral risks she was going to have to take and then taking them in order. And she did it to change the company. It used to be that the recruitment industry would get temps. What was the point of it? Flexible workforces. So you get a bunch of people in chairs cheaply and you pull them out, put them in, pull them out. And it was economically driven, and there wasn't much care for the temps, In fact, as the industry developed, it was win-lose contracts all over. Get the best you can out of the temps, get the best you can out of the employers, take as much money home as you can. And it's really hard-nosed, very tough. But they had pride in that. They had pride in their street smarts. And Julia came in and said, no, that's not what I want. And she was clever enough, with one of my co-authors helped, to say, the first thing I need to do is I need them to develop respect for promises, right? And normally, if you're making promises to each other, it's supposed to be a win-win kind of thing. And certainly if you respect promises, it's a win-win kind of thing. It's only when you use and manipulate promises that it's not. So her first moral risk was to say, in my company, in Impellum, I want to have 3,000 people who all make and keep promises. And that was anathema to the company. The idea of a promise was you promise somebody something and then you make an excuse for not doing it. Yeah. And you make your excuse clever so they have to accept. She did that. The person that I believe was supposed to be her heir didn't keep his promise at all for the quarter. And so she had to fire him for not keeping a promise. And that was a big, big thing to the company. That was her first moral risk. In fact, they were in danger of losing a lot of money because of it, but she went in, rolled up her sleeves, and took over for that person. But that was the first thing, and she got them honoring promises. But that doesn't change the industry. That just changes how they are internally. So then her next one was, I want us to take care of our temp employees so they go the extra mile with their customers. The example she always used to use was a temp employee delivering food in the hospital. One temp employee just puts the food down on the plate and walks out. The other one puts the food down on the surface, explains what it is, tucks the person in bed, cleans up the bed table, and says, thank you. Completely different attitude. She said, that's what we want. And we want to find clients who will pay for that kind of temp employee. And then she said, I want us to let contracts lapse for customers who won't pay for that. Enforcing that, again, she faced a rebellion of her senior people. She had to fire her senior people to make that happen. And the last one was, I won't go into it in detail, getting rid of shady financial deals. So for instance, you didn't pay temp employees vacation money unless they asked for it. She wanted all of those shady deals gone, and she went through some CFOs to get that. But that you could have a strategy to change the shape of your industry and actually think ahead of time of what the moral risks were that you were going to do. That was a surprise to me, and I was delighted by that surprise.
Wow, that's really cool.
I love the thought of starting where she started, which is I want to be able to keep promises, and I want my employees to be able to keep promises.
To do the same.
It sounds so simple, like that. It's revolutionary in its application. It sounds so simple, and yet I've never heard of a company approach it that way.
Right.
And put promise in the forefront of commitment and how you do business. That's really unique, and actually has got my brain firing in lots of different ways.
Yeah, for sure. I'll tell you, I have the idea of that she, in keeping to her promise to herself with the strategy of being able to keep her promise of executing this strategy. She had to let people go, which is never an easy thing. I don't care who you are. Even if it makes complete sense, and it absolutely has to happen every time. You may have mentioned something like this earlier. The most frustrating experience I've had when I've been working somewhere is where there was an employee who was rowing the wrong way or not rowing at all, and they just kept being brought along, and being enabled instead of being called out for it. And then those volumes that it spoke to everyone else were very loud and clear, and that was so frustrating. And I remember getting a piece of advice from someone about, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you are really not wanting to go into work, or there's just something is preventing you from finding joy and happiness in the work that you do, that you need to leave, because it means it's really pushing up against something that is of value for you, and you're having a hard time moving through that to be able to produce anything of value or quality for the company. So I would love to know your experience, and this can be in any of the roles that you have held throughout your working life so far. What is the best piece of advice that you've been given from a leader in the sphere of world and work that you've had?
It's sort of a homely piece of advice. I'll tell you, I'm almost embarrassed to tell you, and It has to do with when I was writing my first book, and I was writing it with basically the person who taught me philosophy. His name was Hubert Dreyfus, and the kind of person I am, I love doing rough drafts. That blank piece of paper in front of me or that blank screen in front of me, there is nothing more wonderful on the planet than that for me. I want to start and just go through it. And in fact, he and I developed a writing style. Well, I would do a rough draft and he would edit it first, and it would come back to me, and we'd go back and forth. But he said to me, Charles, why don't you ever want to play my role? I said, I find it so painful. And he said, why? He said, well, because I'm trying to develop my own ideas and just get them clear. He said, Charles, that's self-love. If you really want to be successful as a writer, if you really want to be successful in front of any audience, you have to love your audience. And that means taking the time to craft each sentence, to craft each expression, so they're going to get it. You don't put in ideas that you're just in love with, that they don't need to hear. You're economical and you craft. And in fact, that described his style. I called it a lapidary style. He was very careful about each word, as though he was writing it in stone. And you couldn't erase it. It was going to be that style. And the achievement was, at one point, I was off doing consulting, and a publisher had asked for a rewrite of an essay we had done earlier, and he didn't want to bother me, so he rewrote a draft of it. It was a follow-up essay, actually. It wasn't a draft. And I found out about it, and he said, well, Bert, why don't you hand it to me, and I'll do what you've done all these years. I'll go through loving the audience, making all the best turns of phrase and crafting it. The basic thing I teach people when it comes to telling truth to power: figure out what you believe is true, figure out the way in which they can hear it. Both are critical. You don't do one, you're cheating yourself and the other person. So it's that. If you give me time, I might be able to think of another more interesting piece of advice for your listeners.
Yeah, no, that is fantastic, and that actually helps us go kind of lead to what you're going to say.
Oh, no, I want you to ask it. I just have one little, I had a visual. I'm a very visual person. And when you were talking about the blank screen and the blank page and how absolutely beautiful that is, it made me think that, I'm an optimist, eternal optimist, and also an idealist. And when I look at a piece of paper like that, what I see is possibility, right? It could be anything. It could be anything. And so that gets me so excited. So when you were saying that, I was having this visual of just this beautiful blank piece of paper that could be anything. And that some people see that as, it's the glass half empty, glass half full. Some people see that as, complete paralyzing fear and nothing, as opposed to everything. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that because that's what it made me think of. So I wanted you to ask.
Okay. Gail, can I say something that might interest you in response to that? So that was how, when I was a young man, all those centuries ago, I would see the blank piece of paper. An interesting transformation took place. I think it was about the time I began the composition of the book. When I see the blank piece of paper now, I see it as necessity. This is my fate. I am married to this paper forever, and I am just drawn to do what I did. But I come at it from the opposite side now. So I suspect you might discover that.
No, we have that little kindred spirit there, right. I think, for sure. I love it.
Well, Charles Spinosa, this has been a fascinating conversation. Author of Leadership as Masterpiece Creation, philosopher, certainly well-spoken teacher. Thank you for helping us love our audience today. I think people are going to get a lot out of what you have you've shared today, and really it just gotten our brains going as we're thinking about our business and the clients that we work with. So thank you so much for being with us today, Charles.
Bruce, it's been fantastic, and I want to thank you very much for giving me access to your audience. I know how hard it is to build an audience, and I am enormously appreciative. I desperately hope that each and every one got something valuable that they can take away from what I said. And if not, I apologize. But I want to thank you very, very
I'm
much.
certain they did.
If they didn't, they were missing the point,
Yeah.
or they had you on mute.
Or we're
That's
sleeping,
what I would say.
Or we're sleeping,
That's
which
right.
happens
That's
sometimes
right.
too.
Thank you very,
it's
very
all
much.
good.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thank you, Charles.